Abby. Thank you so much. Next, we have a gentleman who really likes the very high and very low latitudes. I suspect if you offered him a free vacation to Ecuador, Antarctica, or Alaska, he would probably pick Antarctica or Alaska. I don't know that I've ever met somebody who has gone so far out of their way to live basically at both poles, but in the context of his time here, he's learned a lot about the Earth system and connected that a lot with a really rich array of other interests. And in the context of this project, also supported by the Julia Brown Fund, Trevor was able to travel to Argentina, and the title of this project, Climate Change, Argentina, Climate Change in Antarctica, The View from South America. Trevor, you're up.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Corey, and good morning, everybody. I'm Trevor, and I'm very excited to tell you about a really good movie that I made called Polar Guardians 2. And during the course of the talk today, I'll basically hit up why we made a movie, how we made it, what you can see in this movie, and then where you can watch it. I wanted to put some thank yous up front. As Corey mentioned, this was supported generously by the Julia Brown Fund, without whom I couldn't have made the film. Also my committee, Corey, and then Maria and Dan, who are a couple of Antarctica heavy hitters here at Scripps, but not the only Antarctica folks at Scripps. And I wanted to say the names of my interviewees who appear in the film: Viviana, Andrea, Danilo, Gustavo, Miles, Camila, and Romina. And I also wanted to thank someone whose name doesn't appear up here, but in the last 24 hours, Jada helped me a lot with the technical side of this piece, so thank you, Jada. I really appreciate it. But mostly, I also want to thank my wife, Zoe, who helped me with every part, including the filming, all the way up to advising me on like a choice of pants to wear for today, helping with everything all the time. So thank you, Zoe. Why make a movie? The idea for this, well, I had been in the Coast Guard before I came here. I was on a Coast Guard icebreaker, and the main job was driving the ship, but I had a side job doing the media and making social media posts, which was pretty successful, and I enjoyed it. I had been in Antarctica a long time ago, just doing an unskilled labor job as a dishwasher. And then I also had a bit of a background teaching middle school and high school foreign languages. So I thought, okay, if I made something the intersection of foreign language, media, and polar issues, it would be like fun to make and it would be cool. And that came true. So a little bit of context in which the film exists. 20 years ago, it was very commonplace to use what's going on in the polar regions to kind of educate people about climate change. And there was kind of like a backlash to that developed where, films like Inconvenient Truth, which highlight the kind of plight of polar bears, were sort of seen as like getting people to think of climate change as something that only affects far away places and affects polar bears, but not people. And there was sort of like a backlash against the polar climate film. But in the last 5 years, there's been like a fascinating like backlash to the backlash, where we've started seeing like a ton of movies that talk about climate issues, mostly in the Arctic, and that are very human-centric, especially like as pertains to the circumpolar indigenous people. And I was even in a polar documentary that came out about 5 years ago called Polar Guardians, that whenever someone visits, my wife and I, we make them watch this movie. Even though like I have a comically small part in it, we're very proud of ourselves. And my friend Tom made it, and it was kind of the inspiration, like, okay, well, maybe we could try to make something like that. Could you make a movie? But could you do human impacts for the Antarctic instead of the Arctic? I had read an article in the fall that was really interesting about South American nations ramping up their commitments to Antarctica at the very same time that climate change is progressing there, and it seemed like an under-examined topic. So with only a relatively short amount of time, just a few months, to put this project into action, we had to kind of choose a scope that was appropriately limited, so we decided to go down to Argentina. And part of the choice of that was that Argentina is the only country in the world that has a national holiday celebrating their connection with Antarctica Day. February 22nd is Antarctica Day in Argentina. So we thought, okay, we'll go down, we'll film the festivities that go along with this holiday, everything else that goes along with it, and hit some of the big kind of polar and climate spots in Argentina. a country that has been continuously in the polar region since 1904. But I think the best justification for the film would be to just show you the first 4 minutes in which I lay out the premise, as well as some of the scientific issues, and get the lights. All right, let's see if this works. Well, it says it's playing. Oh, there we go.
Fue algo impresionante, digamos, encontrarse con esa quietud, esa calma, ese contacto directo con la naturaleza, que es algo que el mundo hoy en día no alcanza a sentirlo, ¿no? Ese tiempo para poder sentirlo que da el trabajar en la Antártida para mí fue algo que marcó mi futuro.
I'm Trevor, and I've been working on climate change in the polar regions at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. 5 years ago, I appeared in a documentary film about polar icebreakers. It was called Polar Guardians. My wife and I love showing it to people. And so for my final project, I wanted to make my own movie. But this time about Antarctica. We didn't make it to the frozen continent, but we did make it pretty close, Argentina. And we interviewed the Antarctica experts who live and work there. This is Polar Guardians 2. But first, I want to establish some basics about climate change in the polar regions. The Arctic and Antarctic are both home to a lot of ice, but they differ from one another in some key ways. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere on Earth. As the ice in the Arctic Ocean melts, it causes the Earth to reflect less incoming solar radiation back to space, and the atmosphere and oceans warm. This melts more ice, resulting in a feedback loop. This melting ice doesn't contribute to sea level rise, however, because it's already floating. In Antarctica, the opposite is true. The ice melting off the Antarctic continent and entering the Southern Ocean is raising global sea levels. But the ice in Antarctica is so thick that even significant melting won't change the reflectivity of the surface. Only a few inches of snow can reflect 90% of incoming shortwave radiation, and the Antarctic ice sheet is over a mile thick. Thus, the Arctic is changing faster than the Antarctic, and it has understandably dominated the headlines. New shipping lanes are opening, and resources are becoming easier to extract. The United States, Russia, and China are building up their military presence.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
But with all the attention on the Arctic, I wondered, what's happening at the intersection of climate change and politics at the other pole? What I learned is not widely reported in North America, and it is the subject of this documentary. Climate change in Antarctica is most pronounced in West Antarctica and the Antarctic Peninsula. In the coming years, these regions could be a major contributor to global sea level rise. It turns out, the biggest players in this climate hotspot are not the US, Russia, and China, but South American nations. The US, Russia, and China each operate one base in the region. Chile and Argentina each have 13. In fact, Argentina operates more year-round stations than any other country, and sends more people to the continent than anyone except the US. As a result, South American nations enjoy a powerful vantage point on climate change in Antarctica. This film will examine how that came to pass and what we can learn about climate change in Antarctica from a South American vantage point. My wife Zoe and I decided to go down to Argentina and investigate. Okay, and what we found down there You'll have to watch the movie to find it. No, just kidding. Corey said I couldn't do it that way. I have to show some of my conclusions today, so I shall. Okay, so that's a bit about the why. So how to make it? Well, I had not made a film before, so I needed some help. I took some classes on documentary filmmaking. I took a Spanish class to kind of whip my Spanish into shape, and then a cryosphere class, which was very helpful for understanding some of the scientific fundamentals. We went to Argentina for 10 days and shot all the footage. People we didn't catch there, we caught up with them afterwards over Zoom. And then I've just spent all of spring quarter editing. So we were able to, as I said, the heart of the film was a 10-day trip. So we were able to capture like Patagonian glaciers, and Antarctica experts will notice that in the film, because we didn't go to Antarctica, there are some of the glaciers depicted are actually in South America just as a stand-in. We hit the festivities for Antarctica Day. We went to the University of Buenos Aires, interviewed a scientist there. Went to kind of a glacier-themed museum, and as well as Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world, to document that city's role as sort of like the Antarctic jumping-off point. And a really fun part of making the film was the sound. I'm just going to make a public service announcement. I don't know if Gen Z knows who Moby is, but he just like a month ago released 500 like really high quality songs that are completely like royalty free on the internet, and so anyone who's making like a creative endeavor can use these films. And so in my opinion, like the soundtrack of my movie absolutely slaps as a result of Moby. And if you like electronic music. Okay, so what is in the film? Well, as hinted at already, I was able to recycle some footage I took in 2019 on the icebreaker, polar footage from 2014 when I was at McMurdo, and then lots of South America footage, the sort of things that catch my eye, like animals and magnificent architecture. There's a history section that documents the sort of connections between these two places when they were actually part of the same contiguous ecosystem that is the Antarctic Peninsula in South America. The history of Argentina during the so-called heroic age of Antarctic exploration, what Ushuaia is like now is the modern kind of jumping off point to Antarctica, and a little bit about the political competition I mentioned earlier. But the heart of the film is really the interviewees that I mentioned at the beginning, and that's what the bulk of the film, it's 30 minutes long, is sort of like their testimony as South American polar professionals. What we found down there, like, yes, there has been a ramp up of interest in Antarctica among South American nations, but it's more Chile and Colombia and Brazil, a little bit less so Argentina, which has inherited a lot of polar infrastructure, but hasn't made as many new investments as its neighbors. So we had learned that. Politically, Argentina is really interesting. You may know this guy, Javier Milei, who's the current leader of the country, and has sort of a bombastic personal style who kind of imitates Donald Trump and is good friends with him, and it said climate change is a Marxist invention and wants to get out of the Paris Accords. He shows up in the film briefly, but fascinatingly, his moves in the Antarctic don't really jive with this. Like, he's a self-professed libertarian, but he, when he first visited Antarctica, like joined Argentina to an international treaty to fight microplastics in the Antarctic, and he also, just this last month, they inaugurated fisheries enforcement overflights in waters south of Argentina to ensure compliance with international fishing treaties. So like participating in an international framework to address an environmental externality is like the least libertarian thing you can do. So I don't really know what to make of this guy, candidly. As far as Antarctica Day goes, like, we were so excited about Antarctica Day, and still, we, like, after the trip, Zoe and I will say, like, this is our favorite holiday, is Argentina Antarctica Day. In Argentina itself, we maybe had an inflated impression of how into it people would be necessarily. I would say kind of like the national profile is maybe closer to, I don't know, like Flag Day in the US. You guys know when Flag Day is? It's not Saturday, so just FYI. But we were asking our Uber drivers, like, you guys are ready for Antarctica Day? And they were like, they didn't know what we were talking about. But the people at the Antarctica Museum of Argentina were all about it, and that's the museum director who gave us a really, really lovely welcome. And we interviewed him. We attended the event itself, which involved talking over Zoom to a remote Antarctic research station. And the heart of the film ended up just being like the human testimonies that we captured. This is Viviana, who's been working on polar issues for 40 years. and kind of taught us about how the patterns of wind around the Antarctic continent are sort of shifting closer to Antarctica, which is not only maybe melting the Antarctic Peninsula, but is also contributing to drought patterns in South America. So we kind of think about what's going on in these places through the lens of sea level rise. They have to not only contend with that, but understand that the same climate patterns that are affecting them like at home in their own country are operating on the Antarctic Peninsula. It's something I'd never considered, and tremendous depth of experience. Andrea has been going down since the late 1980s and just talks about the logistical impacts of how her it was 10 below when she started going down there, and now it's in the teens above in the Antarctic Peninsula. Like logistically, all their equipment was prepped for snow conditions, and they're getting rained on all the time now. And just sort of this fantastic testimony. Romina was a veteran of Argentina's Antarctic program that actually sends families to go live at an Antarctic research station. They're the only country that does this. So she and her 2 young children spent a year living in Antarctica, and talks about like the impact that had on her children. You wouldn't sort of find that type of experience basically from any other country, and that was really eye-opening. So that's a good teaser of the film. So where can you watch it? This Friday, just across the street from where we are right now at Sumner Hall at 4 p.m., there's a whole collection of films, including others you're going to hear about today, and then a few more from our sort of sibling program, the Marine Biology Conservation Program. If you can't make it on Friday, there is, I'll put it online on Sunday. So, to incentivize participation at the live event on Friday, you have to wait until Sunday if you want to watch it online, but you can get the QR code there. I'll leave this slide up while I take questions in case people want to take a picture of that. So thank you. Yeah.
Amazing job, Trevor. This was
Thank
really,
you.
really cool. I had a question. I know you said that the general population of Argentina was not as into Antarctica Day. Did you at all kind of grasp their interest in climate change and their surrounding environment, and kind of like, maybe it wasn't like Antarctica Day, but they're more inclined to believe in climate change because of their proximity to Antarctica?
Yes, thank you. I only showed kind of snippets of a few of the interviews. One of the 6 interviews is with an Argentinian NGO worker talking not even at all about Antarctica, but exclusively about domestic impacts. But not only that, like reaction to and perception of those impacts. And I can speak to that right now, thank you, where she mentions sort of that there have been surveys done that showed like a considerable degree of concern about climate change in Argentina. This is due to the patterns of drought, which I hinted at, as well as intensifying wildflowers, and then the Andean glaciers, which are in many ways like a symbol of these countries visibly melting. And that's sort of something that people are reacting to, as well as food scarcity issues due to drought. But that prior to even a few years ago, these were not let's say, politicized issues, but since President Milei, who also appears briefly in the documentary, who I showed earlier, these have become part of the kind of like political polarization process in Argentina, where they previously weren't. I think they were sort of politicized earlier in the US, but she sort of says how they become now part of the discourse, and where once kind of climate change was a pattern of broad concern, if you're sort of on Team Milei, it's become almost like a badge of identity to say that, oh, it's a made-up thing. So these are processes that we can certainly identify with, and yes, and are treated in the film. Thank you.
What aspect of filmmaking did you find to be the most challenging part of this project?
Yeah, I think honestly, like the effective camera work, I think we're maybe sort of dumbed down by like really powerful phones that you can use for 90+% of taking good videos, but to go that extra level involves like a degree of kind of better photography that I've been trained in and have not really kind of gotten there yet. And the experience of taking a blurry video that would have been really cool and what have you, and just having to be really persistent at that. I really liked the editing, but I found the photography part to be more challenging. All right, thanks.